Everyone, this is Joris Peels with another edition of 3D Printing News Unpeeled, thanks to 3dprint.com. And today we've really got a summary of the top 3D printing additive manufacturing news for the day. And we're going to start with Igus. Again, we select this news based on the fact that maybe obviously it's the biggest item of the day. And sometimes maybe it's a smaller news item that you may not have may have passed you by. And I think this is an example, really good example of this. I think this is significant, and I'm quite and yeah, I could imagine a lot of people just flip through this news and just didn't really pay it much attention. Is Igus. Igus is a large German company that makes a lot of gears and a lot of motion control stuff. They make cable guides and lots and lots of products, mainly based on polymer, and mainly based on polymers that are self-lubricating or are very wear resistant. And they're basically making polymer gear or drive or motion control solutions that are that very long lasting and work very well. Now, Igus for a number of years has been supplying the 3D printing market. A lot of your favorite 3D printers come equipped with these chain casings to protect wiring and stuff like that for your motion stage, for example, or may have a number of Igus components on it. The material Igus has also made 3D printing filament and also sintering powder. Now it's releasing a new powder diffusion material, which is called i6 Blue. And i6 Blue is compliant with FDA and EU regulations on food contact compliance, and it's a highly abrasion-resistant, tough, self-lubricating material. So what they're doing is they're making this material available specifically for food-safe worm gears. Also just regular tooth gears and also snap-on connections, specifically for the food industry. So people may not realize that the opportunities in the food processing and production industry is huge. And a lot of companies are using components to improve production lines, to retrofit lines, or to make new food kind of lines and production tooling. The reason for the blue color, by the way, is so that if the part falls into your caramel chocolate, you can spot it very well, because very few foods are blue. And so companies like that parts that you use in and around, like tools and other parts that you use in and around a food processing facility or a restaurant or things like that, are red or blue, so that if they fall into your applesauce or whatever, that you can see them very easily. So this looks like a really specific material. Like, so far, the materials companies have focused on either trying to get really big materials, like polyamide PA11, polyamide 11 or 12, or like company materials like polypropylene, where we know there's a lot of that polymer out there. We know a lot of people are used to using it, and they focus on trying to get those materials to market. Other companies are focused on trying to make materials work that they happen to have a lot of or make very efficiently, in the case of ABS and other materials. Igus is doing something a little bit different. They're taking material that they know, right? They're polymers that are specifically developed for all their abrasion resistance gears and all their tubes and all these other things they do, right? They make these smooth abrasion resistant materials. That's kind of their métier. That's kind of their core thing. And they're taking that experience and the experience they have with gears, and they're identifying this market space, and they're making a product specifically for this market space. And I love this. I think this is a fantastic application, and it's going to be a very, very profitable one for them as well. And I love stuff like this. I really think this is a really good go-to-market. I think it's a really good thing to understand what you're doing and to make a material specifically for that one application. I think this is we should be seeing more of this. The next thing is Thyssen Biofarm. So Thyssen Biofarm has got 1.6 million in a pre-Series A funding round from Envisioning Partners, Future Play, Stonebridge Ventures, and Mirai Holdings. The company will use this to expand research, expand its research facility, reduce production costs, and launch its first products. What Thyssen Biofarm does is cultured meat. They're working on a better texture, better marbling. Now, we've heard that before, and they're working on mass production. Now, what I like about this startup specifically is they're working on their own production technology, and it's a kind of inkjet-based one. And they've developed their own edible bio inks. And they say that's going to lead to high quality cultured meat at scale, right? And this is what I love about this. If we look at all of these cultured meat companies, a lot of them are working on, let's say, the steak or the shrimp or whatever their product is, and developing that and refining that product, which of course is very important. to make a credible steak. And of course, if your steak is better than my steak, then we would assume that you would do better on the sales. Now, the problem that I always see is that they're using standard regenerative medicine techniques and technologies to do this, including into the production. So none of these guys can fulfill any kind of really great demand at the moment. And none of them, if we look at them, if we study these companies closely, we see that they're worryingly disinterested in actually making production technologies to produce this stuff at scale, to manufacture and 3D print at scale. And Thyssen may change this. And I love this idea that you have a company that's focused on just scaling up this production technology. I don't know if they're going to beat out Stakeholder Foods and all these other companies in the market, but they're making a very, very attractive acquisition target, not only for Stakeholder Foods and other companies that have received hundreds of millions of financing, but think about, the amount of exit opportunities in this market is immense. Right, we've got companies like JBS, that's one of the largest meat producers in the world, Purdue Farms, all that kind of thing. We've got companies, ADM, Cargill, really large food groups that have a lot of the grain that could actually have negative exposure from 3D printed or cultured meat. Because it could reduce the demand for the fodder they provide. It could reduce the demand for some of the products that rely on them, and could reduce the demand on things they sell, and often as well. So these companies could be possible acquisition targets, as could a lot of food producers and a lot of FMCG companies. Like think of a Nestle or a Unilever or something like that. So I love the fact that the exits here are just there's a plethora of exits for this firm. If they have a credible production technology, and they can really industrialize this, they will have no problem finding suitors. So I love this kind of like the potential they have if they really are the ones working on this production technology. And if they're like one of the few ones actually working on scaling, that should go really well for them. The next thing is that IperionX is working with Panerai. So they have, there was already about a month ago, there was like a kind of like Panerai and IperionX. We're working on kind of like together. Now, apparently there's a commercial agreement in place. And this is to 3D print watches using IperionX's recycled titanium process. Now, what IperionX has been able to do really smartly is they've been able to put a powder on the market rather than trying to sell that powder into a space that's already very dominated by very big companies. Rather than say, hey, we can do it cheaper, or we can help you fulfill your CO2 goals or whatever, they've marketed this as somehow a more ethical alternative and a more ethical, better for the world type of powder. That, I think, if we're looking at how everyone else is marketing their powders as in a very boring way, is I think a very, very exciting potential thing that they could be doing. Right, a sustainable metal, or a more ethical metal. Think about the problems that these watch producers have with the gold and some of the other materials coming from conflict zones, or the fact that a lot of what they have comes from extractive industries, which is not very pretty if you want to have something on your wrist the whole time. So this could really be a differentiator, and it's really like other companies in the powdered metal industry and have really not grasped like just how exciting the opportunity is for these brand companies to have more ethical materials and to maybe even pay a premium for them. So I think this is a really exciting thing that a lot of people should be following and aren't. So the low carbon recycling process is very advantageous in this sense, especially how it's been marketed. Also been marketed by Panerai. It could really be a brand differentiator for Panerai. Now, this is notable because Panerai is a part of Richemont. And Richemont is a really large luxury group that owns a number of watch brands. So any kind of work that that Panerai does could spill over to Lange & Söhne, Baume & Mercier, Cartier, IWC, Jaeger-LeCoultre, Montblanc, Piaget, Vacheron Constantin, and other watch producers. So they have a clutch of some of the best watch producers in the world, the most followed ones in the world. So this really has a bunch, has a lot of potential. Now, often these companies can operate very, very independently from each other, as of course would really de-risk them. But at the same time, Richemont itself has a number of patents on 3D printing and 3D printing post-finishing techniques, and also patents essentially on having 3D printed watch cases. So Richemont is more fundamentally involved in this, and also they have a number of post-finishing companies themselves, technologies even themselves. So this is not a flirtation. I think last year or what is it, last year? Panerai had a watch that had the Luminor Marina 44 Guillaume Neri edition, insanely expensive watch that had 3D printing components. That to me seemed like a flirtation, just like every once in a while I see a watchmaker make a watch out of like, asteroid parts or something like that. But in this case, it's much more fundamental. It's much more interesting. And it could be much more interesting going forward as well. We know that watch companies use 3D printing extensively. I'm assuming they use it in production, but I'll never get anyone to confirm this. Much more so than we know for tooling and also end products. So David, there's the car industry is talking about 3D printing more than it's using it, but the watch industry is using it more than they're talking about it. That's the difference between these two industries. But Panerai is doing this in a very public way. So this could be very good for 3D printing because the tolerances that these guys have to perform at are very, very high. It's very difficult for them it's very difficult for us to meet those tolerances. So that's a very good kind of thing if large companies such as Richemont and its watch group companies, but also like companies like Swatch or Rolex would also be a little bit more public about what they're doing on 3D printing. But hey, I think Christmas is in a couple of months, and that's all I want really. If these companies to be a bit more upfront, that would be really nice. The other thing is that Holcim is investing in COBOD. I really like this news because COBOD International is called a Danish company, and they were from the very beginning much more realistic about 3D printing and 3D printing's prospects and what it could and could not do as a company than a lot of other firms. In the beginning of this 3D printing construction phase, everyone else was basically, or most other companies were very, very optimistic to the point of being disingenuous, some of them. COBOD was refreshingly realistic and down to earth. And I love that. I love the fact that this was actually a brilliant strategy because it meant that the large companies were attracted more to it than the other ones, because the large companies understood concrete or construction and knew it wasn't all going to be a panacea, this 3D printing stuff. And so I like that the fact that COBOD, by being realistic, has really gotten itself into bed with some of the biggest companies in the world. One of them is Holcim. So Holcim is like 26 billion or something like that dollar revenue kind of materials company. They've been working with COBOD since 2019. And they now join GE Renewable Energy, Cemex, and Panerai is a large construction company, as COBOD investors. So COBOD has really set itself up for success by bringing on board not VCs, right, or maybe they have, but mainly getting their money, or at least the publicly announced money, from a lot of people that know what they're talking about and people that want to use their technology. So that's, I think, a really great vouchsafe for COBOD. Also, it's really good for the construction industry to see these kind of players invest in these companies. Now, what I don't like about this is that Holcim has its ink, its Tector ink. This is a special ink for 3D printing. Now, that's, of course, it's wonderful. Maybe it works better, it dries faster. I don't know what. That's, of course, wonderful. But I'm thinking that if Cemex is another investor, Holcim is now an investor, if these companies are investing in this thing, there's a risk. Well, one is they have the wherewithal to push this to global adoption, so they could make 3D printing construction much, much larger. The second thing is they maybe, especially the materials companies, don't have much incentive to change the way things are done. So they have a lot of incentives to push their own materials. So what I would not like to see is for these companies to use 3D printing because it uses less material, because it builds on location, or it builds in a more carbon-friendly way, to use 3D printing as an excuse for them to essentially greenwash and say, oh, look, we're doing so many sustainable things using this technology, and then not change the core cement or other kind of materials processing type of things they have, because these industries are some of the largest greenhouse gas emitters in the world. And I would hate for them to use 3D printing as an excuse not to reform their ways and come up with much more sustainable materials. But anyway, so I don't know what to think about this. On one hand, this is huge for moving 3D printing construction or making it much more a reality. On the other hand, I'm kind of getting a sinking suspicion that we may be be more of a marketing tool to these guys than we would like to be. Anyway, so thank you so much for your time today. My name is Unpeeled, and this was another edition